It is no good asking for a simple religion. After all, real things are not simple. They look simple, but they are not. The table I am sitting at looks simple, but ask a scientist to tell you what it is really made of. All about the atoms and how the light waves rebound from them and hit my eye and what they do to the optic nerve and what it does to my brain. And of course, you find that what we call seeing a table lands you in mysteries and complications which you can hardly get to the end of. A child saying a child's prayer looks simple, and if you are content to stop there, well and good. But if you're not, and the modern world usually is not, if you want to go on and ask what is really happening, then you must be prepared for something difficult. If we ask for something more than simplicity, it is silly then to complain that the something more is not simple. Hey everybody, welcome back to the library. And before we go any further, of course, hit like and subscribe because we got great content coming at you here on the channel all the time, and we don't want you to miss out on anything. Now, this week, of course, we are back here with the Inkling review, and we're excited to be talking about Mere Christianity. Mere Christianity is considered a masterpiece of lay theology by C.S. Lewis that began as a series of talks on the radio and became this book, Mere Christianity. So let's get into talking about what this book really is. Now, in the past, of course, we always say, what is the story? Of course, we can't really do that here, just like the last couple months. But how is this book structured? Well, the book is structured in 4 parts that do somewhat naturally lead to the next. It begins by trying to get at why this whole thing is important. And he starts talking about the idea of a law of nature, that there's something, regardless of what society and what part of the world you live on, we seem to have a code of conduct that seems pretty universal. And he argues that it has to come from something. And of course, through logic, he eventually leads you to the idea of God. In the second part of the book, he's breaking down, calls it what Christians believe, what is the nature of God, and things like that. And then it gets to the third part, which is a little bit more about behaviors of Christians, and he hits a few different points there along the way. And there's various different ones, but they're all about how we interact with each other and how we interact with God. So everything from social morality to sexual morality and marriage to faith. And then the last book is trying to go with some important theological concepts like the Trinity and how those then translate into our lives and how that changes us, and as he calls it, the good infection. And throughout the book, Lewis's style is pretty similar to what his style in fiction is. He has a uncanny ability to have a great turn of phrase. He's always very pithy. And from what you could hear in the reading, he uses examples to try and drive his points home, to bring the logic of what he's saying to light, such as the table that he was talking about. And he has a habit of doing plenty of examples throughout every chapter of the book. And you need to remember, though, that, and it's clear in some of the wording of the places, this did begin as a series of talks on the radio. This was not something that was written first to be a book. It was written first to be delivered on the radio. And he was very, these talks were so successful that it then got edited into being the book that we have today. In fact, there's even a couple chapters here and there. It's like, well, we said this on the radio, but I feel like I need to clarify a little bit more some of the stuff I said in the last chapter. And so it is very obvious that it's an adaptation of that. Now, again, we'll see how he pulls that off as we go here throughout the rest of of the video. So let's go. Let's stop this summary of the book and let's get to it. So, what are the strengths of this book? Well, again, Lewis is really good at using metaphor and examples to really break these ideas down. So that you and I and everyone else, regardless of how much Christianity they know, are going to be able to understand what he's talking about, the tenets of the faith that he's trying to express. And so that's, again, he called it mere Christianity, so he is trying to get to where everyone can understand. So he does that pretty effectively throughout the entire book. The other thing that he does effectively is the actual structure of the book. The fact that he's starting very logical and trying to... That first chapter is basically trying to argue why we need the book at all. Why is it that trying to talk about religion this way is even a necessity? And so he starts off there. The second part is, well, I've led you to this faith. Why? What does this faith look like? Then into specific moral actions and habits that Christians are going to have, and then how does the more theological concepts, like the Trinity, how do those actually then change humans who follow this faith? That's really well done. He is, he's an academic. He knows how to formulate an argument, and even when he's doing it in a non-academic setting, he's doing it pretty well. So, what are the weaknesses of the book? Oh boy. For me, as I am a Christian, and for me, the fact that he's trying so hard to break down the different parts of Christianity to something as simple as possible, he's doing this with a really small amount of scripture. The idea that you're talking about what it means to be a Christian, what the basics of Christianity are, and you really barely touch on biblical references like the story of Christ that's told in 4 different books in the Bible. The life of Christ isn't really laid out at any point in the book. You have to come to the book knowing that. Now, in the 1950s in England, that was probably a given, or at least a fair assumption you could make that story was pretty well known. In the United States in 2022, a lot of people, probably is still probably a really high percentage of the population, could at least have the vaguest ideas of the outline of the Easter story and the Christmas story, but not a lot in between. So I don't know how effective this is to a more modern audience, where the diversity that the world and society has more and more of probably knocks down some of that basic knowledge of the narrative. And so I don't know if it really is effective today as it would be back then. So the lack of direct biblical references, both for the morality sections, but as well as for the narrative of the life of Christ, I think is actually a pretty big drawback in the book. And I think it's a significant drawback in the book. All right. So, how do I rank it? Well, this is considered a classic of lay theology, and I can see why. Lewis effectively lays out a case. He makes it easy to understand, and part of it's the reason that you should be able to understand is he does spend some time. Sometimes those I feel like he could stop at one metaphor, and he uses 3, so he really does drive his points home. But for me, the lack of a lot of biblical references of actually talking then about the source material of Christianity, for me is a really big drawback. And again, and then add that with the maybe too many examples that he uses as a substitute for that. I think I'm only going with 2.5. Maybe I could stretch it to 3, but I think I'm going to go with 2.5. And that's a personal score. There's a lot of people love this book, and I love plenty of C.S. Lewis books, but this one isn't for me quite as much as it might be for other people. So I'm going to go with 2.5. Again, we could have a stretch. We could round up to 3 if you want, but I'm at a 2.5 here. What's coming up next? Well, next month is going to be Charles Williams's He Came Down from Heaven. This is going to be the last video in our series on the theological works of the Inklings. Not that we won't ever do another theological work, but this is going to be the last of the dedicated series that we've been doing for the last few months. So we'll see how Charles Williams brings his unique writing style and way of thinking to this theological conversation, and then we'll go back to looking at some of the fiction of the Inklings. Now, as we finish off here today, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for coming back here to the library, and we hope you continue to follow us here on the channel so you don't miss anything, because we've got great content coming at you all the time. All right, y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.